what if you want to make some modifications here? There's a couple of things you can do. You can change that acconfig.std file with your customizations. You can add new entries. You can modify the entries that are there. Or you may prefer just to make a copy of that config file with your own custom settings in. Now, if you do that, though, it won't be used unless you set this environment variable ac_config. Now, you need to set that in the environment to the full path of your custom configuration file. Now, you may have different configuration files for different things, whether different locations for your backups and so on. But if you don't set this, the acconfig.std will be used when you run utility. Now, here's some of the values or some of the configuration settings that you can put in that file. I just grabbed this from the man pages. I know there's actually a few more here that are not documented that you'll see when you run archecker. I highlighted a few that are probably ones you may change if you do need to customize this file. The AC message path, that's the location of the log file created by archecker, and by default it was that temp AC message.log. AC storage, that's where those directories are created. And again, if your temp is small or your files are big, then you may want to just point that to a different file system. AC tape dev and AC tape block, you would normally change those if you want to point archecker to a different backup file than your latest backup file. So this is only for on tape, of course. But let's say you've got a backup from last month that maybe had different, you backed up in a different way, or you moved it to a different location. Or if your standard backup process, as I see quite often, once it's created your backup file from on tape, it may zip it up, or we may move it to a different file system, or even a different server or something like that. We may want to just point archecker to that, and we do that by adding AC tape dev into the config file. So you get a list of the configuration files that are being used by archecker when you run it. These are displayed at the beginning of the log file is created, but also when you to stand it out. So this is a nice way of making sure that the correct settings have been picked up either from your Informix configuration file or your AC config file. So here's a little example here. So you see like here, AC tape dev, where it's pointing to, it's backup, on tape archive. So it points here to a directory. So you can verify these and go, yep, that looks right. Now, one thing I have found when you're using, when you're backing up to STDIO, which you might do if you want to pipe through a utility like gzip or whatever, then there's a bit of a quirk here. So if you look at the example here with this on tape, I'm doing a level 0 backup, and instead of sending it to a file system, I'm just sending it to STDIO, and then I'm piping it to gzip and create a backup file. Now, you would normally verify this by unzipping the backup file and then piping it to archecker. Now, if you do that, though, even if you set tape dev in your own config, and even though it says STDIO when you run archecker, for some reason it doesn't find the archive, and you'll get this message that it ran, but it didn't validate anything. The solution to this is modifying that AC config file and adding tape dev as stdio. Here's an example. So I've got in this case, I'm using a custom AC config, and all I'm doing here is setting AC tape dev to stdio, and that's even though tape dev in the Informix config file says stdio. Now you run it this way, it finds the backup and is able to perform the verification. A command that goes along with archecker is this archecker -D X. Now, this is something you'll want to run possibly between different archecker validations, and especially if you're doing table level stores. This is simply a big cleanup. It removes those directories that we mentioned, and also will clean up some tables that are created in the database. And those tables are created with those table level restores. Again, run this if you're seeing issues, seeing some odd things happen, and it's just a good thing to run every now and then. Now, Informix does need to be online and accessible, and you must use a TCP connection because it forks multiple connections. And I think it's worth mentioning that even though it does a big cleanup of these temporary tables and those directories, the log file pointed to by AC message path remains. Now, I've seen a lot of the examples here that I'm using on tape backups. Now, full disclosure here, I've had some issues verifying on-bar backups. Now, I know I've done it in the past, but and really all you need to do is supposedly pass the -B option to archecker instead of -T. But even though the utility runs, it has a problem locating the backup. I've done some traces and stuff. I don't know if it's just the version I'm running against, but I've had this problem with PSM and also net backup. But what you can do is run onbar -V. Now, so the -V sent to onbar is verified. Now, this simply calls archecker, and even if archecker on its own isn't successful, as I found, then the onbar -V normally is, but it runs in a slightly different way. It loops through all of the DB spaces, and it'll check them one by one. Now, you'll see in the little sample here I've cut and pasted from an output, you'll see how the arguments, instead of being just -B or -T, it shows a DB space, the number of a DB space. And you can see this AC pipe and AC pipe block. These are set. So I'm not going to try and explain what's happening behind the scenes here. But this is, so it does run in a slightly different way. Now, I will say though that when I run onbar -V, it has been painfully slow. I don't know whether your guys' experience is the same, but it can take several times longer to run onbar -V than it does to take the actual backup in the first place. But because this utility, onbar -V, calls archecker, the bar ACT log sorry, the AC config file is still used, and the AC storage and AC message path are still used. But in addition to those regular files, we'll also see output in the bar ACT log, which is used by all the on-bar operations for giving a status. Okay, I'm going to just jump into a demo now. before we move on to like the table level restore stuff. Okie dokes. All right, so hopefully that's coming up okay. So this is my
all good.
Okay, thanks. This is my little VM. So I'm just gonna start here by kicking off a simple level 0 archive. So, and this is a nice small instance, so we can run through a few test cases here. So I'm going to run my backup. Nice and quick, right? That's good. Now I'm just going to run archecker tvds, and I'm just going to put the output in a file so we can look at it in a second. Okay, so that finished already. So let's take a look at the output here. Okay, so this is the output that went to standard out, because I had the -S option here. So we see at the beginning, we've got our values here, and these are all the default values. I haven't set AC config here, so the values that are in the acconfig.std file are being used. And anything else is pulled from my Informix config file. For example, AC tape dev, even though I never set that, when archecker was run, it got Informix backups /Informix backups from my Informix config file. Same with some of these other values. And it's telling me, yeah, I found your archive. It's your level 0 in Informix backups. It's an on tape, when the backup was made, some various other things. And then it scrolls through table by table, and checking the DB spaces and checking the tables. I'm just scrolling through here. So it loops through all of these. You can see it going through the different databases. And let's move to the end here. And at the end, table checks passed. We verify 738 tables. Archive validation passed. That tells me, okay, we should be good to restore from this backup should we need to. Now, the other file I mentioned is our archecker file. So let's take a look at this. Starts off very similar, telling us our arguments that were passed to the utility, some of the settings that it picked up. All that's very similar. But it's got a little bit of extra information here about the DB spaces that were verified. And it says, okay, that was all good. And then it goes through all of those tables, just like we saw in the other output. So I'm just going to go to the end here. This is what I like to see. Status equals passed, table checks passed. So all that looks good. So again, we've looked at the two files that are created, standard out and the log file, and we verified our backup. Now, what I'm going to do now, I mean, let's corrupt our backup here.
Hey, Mike.
So, yes.
If I can hop in for 1 second. Could you make the font one size bigger?
Oh, I thought it would be big enough. You bet I can, Tom. No, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm so sorry.
No problem. It's readable.
Okay. All right. So that's a shame. I'm doing a lot of demos here. So here's my last backup, this Informix test. Also, you know what? I'm just going to stop sharing for a bit so I can make that change. Just give me a second here, Tom.
Yep. Sorry to throw you off there. I had a couple folks.
That's quite all right. We should have tested this before. I'm very sorry. Ooh. Almost there.
Yep.
got multiple windows, so I'm just going through.
Fun of live demos.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Let's go back to sharing. Okay, that should look a bit bigger.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to look at my last backup here, which is this Informix test 0L0. That's the one I just created a minute ago. I'm going to mess it up. What I'm going to do, let's just put some random characters at the beginning of the file. Okay, so let's just run our check and see what happens. I'm just going to send output to the screen this time. Whoa. Okay, so lots of messages here, right? So I'm just going to Control C that. So it tells us that failed the sanity check. Let's take a look at message.log. Okay, and this file, by the way, is appended to this AC message.log. So every now and then you might want to delete it. So again, lots of messages here. So it looks like it just kept trying and trying to look at that file. Now, so right away, this tells me I do not want to try and restore from this file, right? This backup, it is bad. So there we go. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I've got this backup that I created yesterday with some different parameters, right? Different like different settings. So because we saw that when I run archecker, it just tries to pick up the latest file or the latest level 0 in the directory here. I want to override those settings. So what we're going to do here, I have a different configuration file. I just called it acconfig.mic. So I've done a couple of things. I'm modifying the AC message path, so I'm going to be writing to a different log file. I've kept the AC storage the same, but I'm hard coding, if you like, the location of the backup file, and I'm also specifying a restore filter, unzip in this case, or gunzip. Okay, now in order to use this, I need to, let's go over here. I'm going to have to set this AC config to the location of that new configuration file. So let's just run it. And even though I can check, hey, I'm getting a sanity check. That doesn't look right. So I look at my AC tape dev, making sure I'm pointing to the right thing, and that's the right backup I wanted to test. But it's giving me a message here: block size mismatch. Now, this is because I changed the tape block size for this backup, and this is the kind of thing that you might have if you've got an old backup from 6 months ago that you want to verify because you need to pull some data from it, and you want to make sure it's good. But in the meantime, you've made some changes to the way you're doing backups, like you've been messing with the block size. Now, an interesting thing here, if I let's just do a calculation here, it's saying the block size is this, even though the AC tape block, which it got from the on config, is 128K. Let's take this number, divide it by 1024, and I get 1024. That tells me that my block size, when I made that backup, was 1024. So I'm going to override the settings in the on config by setting this AC tape block here in my AC config file. So let's Control C this and try it again. This time we're successful. So now we've validated a backup that was in the non-standard location with a different block size. The log file that was written to would also be the non-default one here. That was acmessage.mic.log. So here's the output there. So I essentially just redirected it there. Now, before I go much further, I'm just gonna get rid of that, unset that AC config, so I'm using my standard config file. Okay, so that is that's the using archecker to verify a backup to know it's good to restore from. Now let's get back to the other feature of archecker, which is very useful, and that's the ability to be able to restore one or more tables from a backup using a table level restore. Now, so I have had to use this several times for real, because I get a call like, hey, Mike, we just had someone run an update in production they shouldn't have run, and it's messed up the data. Can you get it back? And you know, you're like, oh man, okay, archecker is the thing to use here, and so we can pull a version of that table from your archive. So there's several things we can do. We can just restore that table in place from our backup, or we can restore the contents of that table from the backup to another table. And that's normally what I would do just for safety, but also the requests I often receive to do this is they want to run a comparison against what's in the table now and what was in the table of the backup, and then they may want to follow that up with some individual SQL statements, some updates, some inserts, whatever, to sync up the tables. Now, as I mentioned before, we can also take a table that's on a backup and write it to a file rather than a table. Okay, so in order to use the table level restore, you need to tell archecker what it is you want restored and how you want to do it. And all of that is done by a schema file or a control file that we'll go through. Something worth mentioning is that in order to do a table level restore, you need to be using a TCP connection. If you are not, and you're sitting there with a shared memory connection with Informix server, you'll get this message, all this stuff, cannot support multiple connections over shared memory, and it's failed, and so on. Always remember to use a TCP connection. So here's an example of a very simple command file or schema file. It's got three things in it. We're starting with the database where the table lives, and the schema of that table. So this is important. So archecker knows how the data is organized when it goes through the restore. You know, knows what the columns are, knows what the definitions are, so it can pull that data back and write it back to this table. Now, even though it says create table, that table is not created when we run the utility. In fact, in this case, because we're populating the same table, it will be created if it's been dropped. But don't get put off by the create table command. So the third thing that we need in here is the insert command. So here we're saying, hey, when you find this table in the archive, write it into the same table. Okay, so insert into change tab, select star from change tab. So essentially, when the utility goes through the archive, it'll stage the contents of that table, and then it will perform this insert and load the work table, the stage table, into the target table. Now we run this very easily. It's our archecker. Here we've got our TVDS, just our standard thing that we use to check a backup. We've added two things on here: capital X and followed by an F, and then the name of the command file or the schema file, right? So that's its instructions of what to do when we run it. Now, in this example, I'm loading the same table that I'm trying to restore. I'm not loading it to a different table. That kind of worries me, and I always prefer to load to another table anyway, so then we can say, all right, here's the table as it was before I ran anything, and here's the table from the backup. So to do that, we add one more table in there. Again, this is another create table. This time, this table will get created if it doesn't exist already. So starts off the same: our database, our source table, the one we're trying to restore from, the definition of the table we're trying to restore to, and then the insert is changed because instead of inserting into our source table, we're inserting into our target table. Change tab restore in this example. Now here, I would normally make the definition of that target table the same as the source table because that makes sense. But if I wanted to, I can, perhaps I didn't want to restore one of these columns. I can define the table, my target table, differently. I could skip maybe log num or whatever, and then I just change my insert statement to select the various columns. So instead of select star, it would be select ID, inst time data, and avoid log num. Okay, so even in this syntax, these changes are all made to the command file. The command to restore the table is exactly the same. It's just archecker tvds xb xf. Sorry. Okay, so a few comments. So that source table, it doesn't need to exist in the database. So if the reason you're trying to do this restore is because someone dropped the table, that's okay. You just need to define it in the command file. You don't need to create it, and it won't be created unless you're doing the syntax where you're loading the same table that you're restoring from. Now the target table. Now if this doesn't exist, it will be created for you. But if it does already exist, it will be appended to. So that's often what you don't want. And this might happen if you've run the table level restore, and then you hit some sort of problem, and then you run it again. Then you may have messed up because you've got duplicates in the target table. So it's good practice just to drop that table, your target table, prior to rerunning archecker. Something nice is that because these are logged operations, if there's indexes, constraints, triggers, or whatever on that target table, because you've already created ahead of time, perhaps, they will be disabled during the load and then enabled afterwards. Okay, so a few things about the restore. Now, the last level 0 backup will be used for the restore. We can't go through level 1s, but it will go through, archecker will attempt to roll forward during the logical logs. Just replay those logical logs, look for activity against that table, and replay them. Now, one thing that might catch you out is that during that replay of logical logs, only logical logs that have been backed up will be replayed. So if there's activity in your current log, that will not get replayed. So good practice is to switch logs, so just move on to the next log before running archecker. That's unless perhaps the delete or update or whatever is in the current log, but you can't always know that. So it might be a good practice to switch logs before attempting the restore. Now, something I found is that if you're using backup filters, restore filters like gzip or gunzip, whatever it is, then it won't do a roll forward when you run archecker. But the strange thing is, I thought this used to work at some point, but in my testing of the last few weeks, it didn't. All we get is the data from the physical restore, so from the level 0, and there'd be no roll forward. So I just added this comment. Maybe that's version dependent. So I'm not too sure on that. Something to note, now we mentioned how output goes to standard out, and also the AC message.log is the default name. If you start running into problems and you're looking at standard output and you're like, okay, this is really vague. I've just got this critical error. I don't know what's going on here, and it gets confusing. Look at the AC message log, and it will usually give you a little bit more information to go on. So in this case, I added a syntax error by accident in that command file. I semicolon in the wrong place, and as soon as I saw this message here in the log file, right, there's I got syntax error and can fix it really easily. But in the past, I've been sitting there at standard output and going, well, that's no help. Okay, so we're talking about rolling forward from the logical logs, right? Now, the reason you're probably trying to recover a table is because somebody did something bad to mess up the table in the first place. They ran a delete or an update or a drop or an insert, whatever, and they've modified the data, and you want to get back to the moment before they did that change. And you can do that by creating a point in time restore. So say roll forward until this point. And you've probably seen that with regular restores with onbar. You can say, restore to this point in time. So we can do the same thing here, and this works with ontape. We added an additional statement to our command file. We tell it where to restore to. So a replay logs to that point and no further. Now, there may also be times where we do not want the roll forward to happen. We just want to say, okay, it's all very nice, but I only want the stuff from the last level 0 backup. We can tell archecker to do that with this line, restore to current with no log, essentially saying just restore from the level 0 and don't try and a nice little feature here is, let's say we're trying to restore from a large table and there's only a subset of the data that we need. We can add a filter into our insert statement here. And we just add a where clause to that insert statement. And now it will be selective when it does the restore. However, what I have found is that you can add this in and you run archecker, and it will restore your table and it will do the roll forward, but the filter won't be applied. So the filter will only, at least now, maybe this varies by version or something, but at least in the version of 14 I'm using here, as soon as I added that filter, I got a full roll forward to the current point in time, from the logical logs, but the filter wasn't applied. You have to deliberately say, hey, do not do a roll forward. And we do that with the command that I mentioned on the previous slide, restore to current with no log. If you do that, the filter will be applied, but it will only work against the data that was in your level 0. Your logical logs will not be applied. A couple of other things I don't need to go into detail, but we can override the default commit interval from 1,000 to 500 records. You might want to do that if you're storing a lot of data and you run into a long transaction or whatever. So here in this example, I've lowered it. I might want to extend it. So these are just an additional line that we can add into the command file. And I'll show some examples of this later. Now, by default, all of the working tables and everything are put into the root DBS. We can override that if our root DBS is getting a little full, we just want to avoid it anyway, by setting a workspace. And again, this is in that command file at the beginning. And here we're setting the workspace to a data DBS file. Now, I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but archecker runs 3 phases when we're doing this table level restore. Does the physical restore, stages the data, and then it applies the data. I have never had a reason to do this, but it is possible to do no, Jacob, the temp DB spaces cannot be used as a workspace. I just saw that pop up. So you can run these stages individually. You might just want to run the archecker, and then this is a -L, not an I. So you run the physical restore phase separately, and then maybe in this example, I'm then running the stage and apply. If you do the physical restore phase separately, don't go ahead and use the -D option in archecker, because it'll just go ahead and clean up those same tables that have been populated in these earlier phases. But I found it interesting. If you look at the tables, the values here that are in the target table, it's added these little columns on here for this IFX TLR row ID and TLR partner. When you get to the apply phase, those columns are I've mentioned these tables that are created, the working tables, and here's just a screen print of some of these things. Most of them have ACU in them. There's a couple of arcs, and these get removed when you run the -DX archecker, just clear all those up. I think this is my last. Oh no, it's not last. It's near the end. So I've also mentioned you can use archecker instead of restoring to a table in the database. There's this nice syntax now where you can use an external table, and as you know, when an external table is linked to a file on disk, so you can you simply change that command file. Instead of just create table, target table, you add the keyword external, and then you add in this using statement and give it a file name. When you run the restore, instead of creating a new table in the database, it'll just dump this out to this file, dump the contents out to this file, which is quite nice. Now, the syntax here is not quite the same as a conventional external table that you might create in the database, directly. This file name, for example, doesn't have that disk keyword. And the only option here is delimited or Informix. Informix being the internal format. You can't change the delimiter, for example. Not that I've experimented too much with that, but if you're familiar with external tables, there's lots of options you can use there to format the data in the file. Yeah. So as soon as you start using external tables, though, you cannot roll forward from the logical logs. It will do a physical restore only. That's a bit of a shame. I'm not sure why that's restriction is in there, but I'm sure there's a good reason. Now, filters can be applied, but the same restriction applies. in order for the filter to kick in, you need to add this restore to current with no log. Okay, wrapping up here. Now, the table level restores from an on-bar has an additional requirement. You do need to specify the DB space of your source and target tables. And when you run the restore, it will zoom in, if you like, or restrict it to the DB space where the source table lives. Now, you'll notice from those the command files that I've used, you've got to give the schema of the source table. But what if somebody dropped it, right? You don't have the definition of that source table in the first place, and it's pretty tricky to obtain. It is good practice to regularly, excuse me, dump out the schema of your database just to a file and keep it somewhere safe. I sometimes make that part of a regular backup, just so I have that schema file there, and I might just zip it up or something. But it could come in handy if you get that call like, hey, can you get this table back? Somebody just dropped it. Okay, I'm just gonna do a demo now of a table level restore. Okay, so let's just get to this. I'm just going to create a table here. It's the same table I've used in these examples here in my slides. So I'm creating this little table, change tab. Okay, so it's a very simple table, just a few columns. So that's that, and I've got a script to insert some dummy data here. I'm just going to add a couple of rows. And this data is just so I can separate the columns here, the records. So let's see what we've got in here now. So we've got 2 records, and now I want to make sure those get written to a backup. I'm just going to do a level 0 backup. Nice and quick. And well, isn't that strange? Oh, I wonder if I filled up that directory or something. It's pretty full. I hope that was it. Oh, cleared up much room. Let's clear up some stuff. Okay, let's hope we can get this back up successfully. Man, cannot turn archive timestamp. Has anybody seen this before? I have done this so many times, as you can see from these backups here. Let's see now. Okay, that worked. Hoping that was just a space issue. Okay, so I've got a level 0 backup now. So I'm going to insert a couple more records here. And let me show you the command file I'm going to use to do this restore. So I've got my database defined, I've got my source table defined, and a target table. And now I've got my insert statement here. So I am just gonna make sure that my restore table is gone, because it'll get created by the process. But I'm just going to start off here, tbtsxf store simple cmd. Okay, so it ran through the process here and said it produced 2 rows, logically recovered nothing. Now, let me show you what's in that table. This is my restore table, but this is my target table. I'm missing something. And the reason for that is that these last 2 records were not included in my level 0 backup. Instead, they are in the logical log. And remember I said that the current logical log is not included in the replay. So the best practice here, let's just switch logs. Oh, wrong way around. So let's back up the log and force the checkpoint. Now let's, I'm going to drop my restore table because I don't want it appended to. And I'm going to run archecker again. So this time we've got 2 rows from the level 0, and then the logical recovery added another 2. So let's see, there we go. I've now got all 4 records in my restore table. Okay, since a couple more records here for some further testing. Okay, so I've now got 6 records in here. I'm not going to do that yet. Now let's see what the date is here, or the time. This is UTC time, so it's just make a note of that. 46. So you probably guessed I'm going to do a point in time restore. Now, let's simulate somebody messing up the data. So they're going to delete from the table where ID, let's see, 2 and 3. Let's delete a couple of records here. So let's look at our production table, if you like. So now we've got 4 records here. We're missing records 2 and 3. Let's remove our target table, and we want to make sure that all of this gets all of the current log is written out, so it will be all of these operations, insert and the delete, will be written to the logs and be part of the replay. Okay, so now let's say, just as an example here of, if we just ran the restore here, this already tells you we inserted 4 and deleted 2, right? We've replayed that delete, which is what we didn't want to do, right? Because now we're just back in the same situation. So here, obviously, I'm going to do a point in time restore. Now, with this command file, I've added these other lines that I discussed. We're setting a commit interval, we're setting our workspace. Don't really need to do this in this example, but I just wanted to add these in here. And I'm going to say restore to, so 7 at 04, I think 0447 should be fine. Oops. Okay, so I've got to remember to drop that target table because we don't want to append to it. Now I'm going to run the archecker, and I've got a different command file name, so I'm just going to give that. Now, so we see here, I'm not seeing records added, but let's take a look at the data. So it says recovery point in time reached. So let's see what we've got in here. And we're not seeing it. Really? Okay, what am I missing? Uh, 12, 9. Ah, sorry, forgot about the UTC time. So let's try 16. It was PM, didn't it? God, excuse me for that. So let's drop. Here we go. So we've got our 2 records from the physical restore, and we processed 2 log files. We hit our point in time, and this is telling us we inserted another 4, but we didn't delete any. That's what we want to see. So if I take a look at our target table, we've got everything that we did up until the point of that delete. So we stopped at that delete. Okay, so okay, so that was good. The next thing I want to show is restoring to a file. So I have another command file I prepared earlier. This is exactly the same as the last command file, except now I'm restoring to an external table that goes to this file. So let's make sure that file doesn't exist. It's not there. Very good. And now I'm going to run a drop. So our restore table's gone. Well, that's been cleaned up. And then, okay. Now, even though that command is just the same as last time, I don't have that point in time in there, saying stop replay, because I'm using an external table, no roll forward will occur. So if well, first of all, let's make sure if that table exists. It doesn't. So this is something different from not using an external table. Even though we said create external table, it is there only temporarily for that restore, or it may not even be created in the first place. So unlike a regular external table, it won't persist. So we don't expect it to, because we don't want the data loaded there. But now let's take a look at, see if that file was created, and it is. So let's take a look at it. And there it is. So we've got a delimited file with our 2 records in it. Unfortunately, there's only the 2 records because external tables means no logical roll forward. So that's a shame. But there we go. That's a demonstration of the table level restores. One thing I didn't mention is that if you want to restore multiple tables in that as part of the same run of the utility, you just mention them multiple times in that command file. You can also mention multiple databases, like I want this table from this database, this table from this database, just using like regular SQL. Okay, let's go back here. So that's the end of the presentation. I just wanted to say a little bit about our company, XDB Systems. We provide consulting services with almost entirely Informix, and we provide virtual support for different levels of support. Either like we can be a full-time DBA essentially, or if you just need to reach out to us on occasion. Yeah, and we've done a lot of upgrades and migrations recently. Okay, I'm going to open up to questions. I saw a few things come in as I was as I was presenting, but I didn't have a chance to read things. Let's see now.
Mike, do you need anything read out, or do you got it?
I'm just going to stop presenting here, so hopefully I can see the oh no, here we go, chat.
Yep.
Oh man. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of stuff here. Just bear with me a second here. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry about the font size. Okay, so talking about Jacob, you mentioned rolling forward to a log. I don't know. I haven't found a syntax where you can roll forward to a log, but you can look at the timestamp of that log, or when the next log was created and restore to that point in time. The restore clause is outside the SQL insert, yes. As I showed you in the example there, the restore to is, I put it at the end of the file. It follows the insert. The workspace cannot be a temporary space. Now, for fragmented tables, it should work exactly the same way, but I can't say I've done much testing of that. But yeah, remember to define that your source table the same way as it's defined in the database. Otherwise, you may have problems with the utility locating it and being able to restore from it. Okay, if there are any other questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll wrap this up. Okay, all right, well, thanks everyone. If you do